I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, real concerns, both here in America and in Israel, with the disconnect between the power of the ultra-Orthodox rabbinate in Israel and the vast majority of non-Orthodox Jews, both in Israel and here in the United States. In the Times of Israel, a centrist online news organization in Israel, its editor, David Horowitz, wrote a poignant piece lamenting the way in which non-Orthodox Jews are captives of an ultra-Orthodox establishment in matters pertaining to family life, marriage, divorce, burial, conversion, the adoption of children, as well as in the public sphere, Shabbat, holiday law, the observance of kashrut in Israel. The catalyst for the Horowitz piece was an event in Haifa which has highlighted the problem. A non-Orthodox rabbi was awakened in his home at 5:30 in the morning, by Israeli police, and was taken to the police station for questioning. His name is Dov Chayan, and he's associated with the Masorti movement, which is the Israeli arm of the conservative movement here in America. And his crime? Being Mesader Kedushin, the officiant at the wedding of an Israeli couple. In Israel, it is against Israeli law for any rabbi to officiate at a Jewish wedding unless they are on an approved list of ultra-Orthodox rabbis. Therefore, Rabbi Chayun is not permitted to officiate at a wedding, and by doing so, he broke the law. In other words, Jewish couples in Israel must be married with an Orthodox rabbi in a sort of town hall official wedding, which register them as married. Many Israeli couples then have a rabbi of their choice participate in a family wedding celebration, although this wedding has no formal state sanction in the Jewish state. Since this situation only applies to weddings in Israel, some Israeli couples actually take trips abroad for their wedding, so they can be married again by the rabbi of their choice. Now, many in the Jewish world, including Israel, have pointed to the irony of this aspect of Jewish life, that the only place in the world where Jews may not be married with the rabbi of their choice is the Jewish state of Israel. Apparently, Masorti Rabbi Dov Chayun served as a Mesader Kedushin at a wedding where the couple did not first have a wedding with an approved ultra-Orthodox rabbi. That was Rabbi Chayun's crime. You should also know that the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, reported that one party of the couple was the child of a forbidden relationship, which means that person could never be married by the Orthodox rabbinate in Israel. If this is true, it does complicate the matter. But as far as we can tell, this fact has not been verified, and the bottom line remains the same. Namely, a Masorti rabbi was taken to the police station and detained at the police station for participating in a Jewish wedding in Israel. And when the Times of Israel's editor published a piece highly critical of this and other examples of the power of the ultra-Orthodox parties to dominate Jewish life in Israel, it reflects a growing dissatisfaction with the status quo among Israelis. And I want to emphasize this, among Israelis. At the same time, the incident involving Dov Chayun, as well as the collapse of the Western Wall compromise that would have established a non-Orthodox egalitarian section at the Kotel, has been enormously offensive to many American Jews, and not surprisingly, to the leaders of the conservative movement and the Reform movement and the Reconstructionist movement. There's also been concern expressed by the leaders of the conservative movement over the Knesset's recent passage of a basic law, analogous to an American constitutional amendment, affirming Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. There's a fear this is going to somehow erode Jewish democracy in the state of Israel. So what's it all mean? And to what extent does the current status quo in Israel and the power wielded by the ultra-Orthodox parties and by the chief rabbinate in Israel do anything to the relationship between non-Orthodox American Jews and the State of Israel? For some insight into this issue, I'm so pleased to be joined by one of American Jewry's foremost leaders, Rabbi Steven Wernick, CEO of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the organization of conservative synagogues throughout America. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Steve, first, what's your take on Dov Chayon's being taken to the police station because he officiated at a wedding ceremony in Israel?
Well, obviously it's outrage. I just want to correct one thing that you said. My understanding is that the allegation that one of the parties to the wedding is ineligible to be married because of being of a forbidden union, so to speak, is just rumor and innuendo, and has no basis in fact.
Yes, and we did say we cannot verify that, so I'm glad you emphasized that.
Look, the issue here is it's not just that he was arrested. It was that in 2013 the Knesset passed a law that made it illegal not only for a person to officiate at a wedding in Israel that was not under the authority of the Rabbanut of the what is becoming more and more extreme Jewish leadership in Israel. But it's also, quite frankly, it's illegal for the couples as well. And so everybody that participates in or officiates at such a wedding is technically liable to 2 years in jail for doing so. What's really kind of ironic about all this is that on the one hand you have the Rabbanut saying that any marriage that is done by somebody other than the Rabbanut is no marriage, and then on the other hand they're now passing a law and arresting people for doing a marriage that they don't recognize in the first place. So if it's not a marriage, then how can you even do this? The problem here is that it's just outrageous. I mean, Israel is now the only democracy in the world where Jewish pluralism is not only not supported, but now you have the very scary prospect of the police acting on behalf of the religious courts. That's frightening. It should scare all of us.
By the way, I could not agree with you more, and this has nothing to do with my position on the overall character of the Jewish state, the issue of the chief rabbinate. It is just, I'll use your word, it is outrageous that Israeli police are taking any person, in this case a rabbi, out of their beds in the early morning because they participated in what is at the moment in Israel an illegal wedding. By the way, there are two.
Yeah, but come on. It's the legal argument here is flimsy at best. I mean, during the 40s, 50s, and 60s with the Jim Crow laws in the United States, it was illegal for an African American to eat at a breakfast counter. Right? 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Anat Hoffman was arrested for carrying a Sefer Torah in the Kotel Plaza because that was illegal too. So the problem is not just that he or she or anybody gets arrested for this. The problem is that how can the Jewish state legitimately claim to be the Jewish homeland for all the Jewish people if it's going to be acting in such ways?
Okay.
And that's the problem. It's an issue of civil rights. It's an issue of democracy. First and foremost. And then it's an issue of Jewish pluralism, tolerance, and respect, and so forth and so on.
Okay. I want you to respond to the two major answers that are given to anyone who argues as you have. The first one is, look, the founding philosophy of the conservative movement is that halakha, Jewish law, while it may not be divine in detail, Jewish law is a primary consideration when determining Jewish observance. And at the moment, my understanding is that halakha, Jewish law, continues to carry primary weight in conservative Judaism. And there are those who would say, according to Jewish law, there are certain things that must be done and certain things that must be checked through, which under most circumstances does not go that far within conservative Reform Jewish practice. And there's obviously an enormous concern within aspects of the Orthodox community that non-Orthodox Judaism has been at least a factor in the growing assimilation rate here in America, if not a major contributing to it. So the question is asked on the first, in one sense, if there is a halakha which the Orthodox in Israel are trying to maintain, even if it does not embrace pluralism, and the reality is Orthodoxy does not embrace pluralism, why shouldn't that be considered for the Jewish state of Israel? Why shouldn't there be one place in which there is a commitment to a traditional notion of halakha? This is one of the things you hear, Steve, all the time from those who oppose pluralism in Israel. What is your answer?
I think it's a false argument. For one, who's halakha? Rabban Gamliel's, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, Rabbi Yosef, Karo, the Ramah, Epstein. I mean, whose halakha are you talking about? By that very same argument, even in Israel today, then explain to me why it is that Rabbi Riskin, who we know very well, was in danger of being fired from his rabbinic authority over issues of conversion. And Zohar, which is an Orthodox movement, is not able to officiate at weddings either. Right? So this notion that there was a traditional halakha and that halakha was homogeneous, it does not bear up to the facts of Jewish history and Jewish experience. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim is what the Gemara and our tradition says.
Yes.
That these and that are both the words of the living God.
Yes.
So the notion that there could be a single homogeneous halakha is just false.
Okay.
That's always been the case. That's the premise that's here. And you have Orthodox leaders in Israel that are even being denied
absolutely
the ability to do this, as well as, by the way, as we saw from the blacklist that the Rabbanut had of even American Orthodox leaders that included Haskell Lupstein of all people. And questioning his Batei Din, or questioning even the whole conversion issue started some 20, 25 years ago when the Haredi Beit Din of the Rabbanut started questioning Drucker's Batei Din. So this notion of a homogeneous halakha is just ridiculous. It's a false god.
And since we're talking about this for one moment, let me push you when it comes to Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism is not committed to halakha, Steve. Do you have a different feeling about the extent to which Reform rabbis should be included in the general Israeli community that would be part of official Judaism for the state of Israel?
Yes, I mean, look, I think that Israel, if Israel seriously wants to be the homeland for all the Jewish people, and if it views Jews everywhere around the world, especially in the United States, as a strategic asset, then it has to level the playing field. It either has to, in some way, shape, or form, support all the streams, all the recognized streams, or not support any of them from an official position, right? Or some middle ground that people haven't been able to think of yet. Mm-hmm. But yes, I mean, this issue here, I would be just as upset, and I think that the world Jewry would be just as upset if it was a Reform rabbi who was arrested, and not a conservative rabbi.
I agree.
And quite frankly, under the rules and the law as it's written, it could have been an Orthodox rabbi who could have been arrested as well. For officiating in such a way. The fact that the law exists is is a busha. It's an embarrassment. The fact that the police acted on it is even worse.
No, that's outrageous.
And that at least has been acknowledged by the intervention of the Attorney General, who put a stop to this.
That's correct. All right, let me give you the other argument. You know, as many do in our audience, the vast majority of Israelis self-identify as secular Jews, even though they may celebrate Friday night Shabbat in some way, Jewish holidays. And while an increasing number of Israelis are gaining an appreciation for the American streams of non-Orthodox Judaism, for American Jewish pluralism, Masorti, and Reform in Israel, the typical Jewish thinking of Israelis is, I don't go to a synagogue, but if I did, I would go to an Orthodox synagogue, because Orthodoxy is authentic Judaism in its total commitment to halakha. And for that reason, most Israeli Jews only care about the way in which ultra-Orthodoxy impinges on their life. They are annoyed by the way in which ultra-Orthodoxy now impinges on their life, and also the issue of the economy, and the ultra-Orthodox Jews contribute to the economy, and that they serve in the IDF. But where they're not affected, most Israelis simply don't see any of the issues we're talking about as terribly important. What would you say to these Israeli Jews who just do not appreciate why this is such an issue for American Jewry?
First of all, as we've seen with Duby's arrest over this issue, the request that he's now received for officiating at weddings has gone through the roof. Secondly, we have to appreciate that the way in which Israelis engage religiously is different than we do in North America. Right? So, the Masorti movement has almost doubled in the last 20 years, and now represents somewhere between 4 and 6% of the overall Israeli population, whereas the Haredi parties, for example, I think are 12%. Right? So it's like, let's keep this in context in that regard. And secondly, because Israel, as a matter of policy, and as a matter of policy, supports the Haredi, the rabbinate institutions, and the local municipalities and so forth and so on, the Masorti and Reform communities are really more dependent upon the philanthropy of Israelis to support those communities, or the philanthropy of Jews outside of Israel to support those communities. So we're from a financial perspective, we're wholly outgunned. Israel spends somewhere over $400 million a year to support the Israeli rabbinate and religious authorities. So it's skewed in that regard. But nevertheless, you can take my colleague Rabbi Elisha Wolfson, who's in Zichron Yaakov. He has about 125, 150 members of his synagogue, but he's doing 100 plus b'nai mitzvah a year. So he's providing, and I don't know how many weddings that he's doing, but I'm sure it's a very impressive number as well. What you see all over the place in Israel with Masorti rabbis is that there's the community, the core that they serve, and then there's a larger public that are also being served, but are not part of the membership or the identified core. So it's difficult to know exactly. People in Israel are not going to identify conservative or Reform or Orthodox in the same way that we do. But there are a rapidly growing number of Israelis that are seeking the religious experience that is being provided from the Masorti movement, and we need to start counting that as an impact as an impact number which actually expands the overall number of people that the Masorti movement in Israel is reaching and impacting. You know, the argument that you outlined is too simplistic for what the reality is.
Okay.
The reality is much more nuanced and greater.
Look, you may be right. It is not my experience, and I speak to Israelis all the time, and my sense is that there would be an organic change in the state of Israel, and there may be, Steve, an organic change. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for an indigenous development of a Jewish sensitivity that embraces what you and I call Jewish pluralism. And again, it doesn't even have to be the kind of experiences that Reform or conservative or Reconstructionist Jews experience here in America, but something that is a balance to, or an alternative to, or a cousin to the Orthodox in the state of Israel. And you and I understand we can't get into it now because it would take us too much time. But the reason why the Orthodox have power in Israel goes back to a decision that David Ben-Gurion made when he was worried about any Jewish character of the state of Israel and wanted to make sure there was some kind of Orthodox presence. And people argue he never could foresee the problems that decision would ultimately lead to. But it's important for me to have you speak to one last issue. I happen to feel, by the way, anytime I go to Israel, I feel Israel is totally embracing of me. And by the way, if I want to go to a conservative synagogue, there are Masorti synagogues in many cities and towns in Israel. If I want to go to a Reform synagogue, if I'm in Jerusalem, if I'm in Tel Aviv, if I'm in Modi'in, there are wonderful Reform synagogues that I can go to. Day-to-day life for any non-Orthodox Jew, day-to-day, is totally embracing. And the one thing I want to make sure you and I, you may not agree with me, but I'm hoping you do, is that no American Jew, while every American Jew, non-Orthodox or Orthodox in America, modern Orthodox, Avi Weiss, example of a rabbi who was put on this blacklist by the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, Haskell Luckstein, Shlomo Riskin in Israel. I would expect them to feel exactly as you and I do. There should be an embrace Jewishly of any expression of Judaism. That aside, however, the day-to-day life of the state of Israel is totally embracing of you and of me, of secular Jews here in America. And what I hope does not happen is I don't want there to be a feeling of estrangement among non-Orthodox Jews here in America because of this wacky, to use your word again, outrageous conundrum in the state of Israel. I want Jewish leadership. I want you. I want me here on JBS. I want every Jewish leader in America to say this is a serious problem that must be addressed, but it should never create a breach between American Jewry and the state of Israel. I want to know if you agree with me or you see it differently.
Look, I mean, I'm only so excited about this because I care so much, and because I think that the destiny of the Jewish people is tied together, especially since the establishment of the State of Israel. So the part of what concerns me is that there's a cumulative effect to these issues. Plus, considering most American Jewry is more liberal in its politics, it doesn't see its values, even in the political sphere of Israel, necessarily being represented or put forward as it understands Jewish values. So the gap between the diaspora and Israel is growing because the Israeli government continues to pay only lip service to how important and serious this issue is. And even when the prime minister, could have gone down in Jewish history as a hero for addressing this in a serious way, he reneged because of the political realities of the Israeli system and the Haredi vote. I would never, argue that that's it. I'm done. Let's pack up and forget about it. But when even someone like me looks at Israel and instead of seeing a light unto the nations and certainly a light unto the Jewish people, starts seeing that light being dimmed and diminishing. It's a Kal v'chomer argument, all the more so for people that are not as engaged or knowledgeable as I am or as others are, right? So we do have a serious issue here, and the Israeli government and the Israeli society has a responsibility, to be as serious about this as I and other Jewish leaders around the world are. I want to point out that after Dubi's arrest, the condemnation from the diaspora came from many corners, not just the religious world, and that the Stuart Eisenstadt and Dennis Ross, who are the chairs of the Jewish People Policy Institute, have repeatedly reported to the government and to the Prime Minister how these actions are damaging the relationship between the diaspora and Israel.
I understand.
So I agree with you. I only wish the Israeli government would take it as seriously as you and I and others in the diaspora are taking it.
Okay.
The problem is that the Israeli government is not.
Okay. I don't disagree with you. I want people like you to come out strongly about in one way that this is nonsense that will be changed over time. We should never stop lobbying for it. I want there to be a third section at the Western Wall where I can stand with my wife, where my daughter can become bat mitzvah. There should be a third section, and that represents something powerful about the movement of the State of Israel. But what I have to tell you, you and I disagree on one thing fundamentally. There's no less light for me coming out of Israel. What the light out of Israel is extraordinary in what it does, and the Israeli people have the right to ultimately throw the bums out or keep the bums as they are. And we must do everything we can, ultimately, to kind of move the needle. And you are doing that marvelously. By the way, you are a very, very special man and one who has done extraordinary work for the Jewish people. Every time I have you on, by the way, I say we should meet in studio, and then it never happens. Steve, I want you to come in and sit with me for an hour on L'chaim.
I'm be happy to arrange that. Let's get our people to talk to each other, and we'll make that happen.
That is lovely.
Just one last thing.
I hate to do this. We are out of time. We will continue this discussion, I promise. Thank you for all you do for the Jewish world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Steven Wernick, who again heads the United Synagogue of America for the conservative movement. We are out of time. It's a tricky issue. For me, it never means there should be a break between American Jewry and the State of Israel, and Jewish leadership has to say that loud and clear. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, and to our producer, who's back from vacation, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.